Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into something that really gets people fired up, movie and TV adaptations of books.
Yeah, you see it all the time online, don't you? That wave of react when a new one drops.
Totally. Thinking about like the Netflix Persuasion or Amazon's Rings of Power and the Wheel of Time.
Mm-hmm. And Anne Rice's interview with the vampire got people talking too. And, well, can't forget Velma.
Oh, Velma. Yeah, that was something else. Caused quite the storm.
You really did. And it happens across all sorts of genres, which is interesting. Fantasy, literary fiction, even cartoons.
Right. Now, look, these conversations often touch on really important stuff like representation, and that's valid.
Absolutely.
But today, we want to sort of peel back that layer a bit. We're trying to get at the core reasons why some of these adaptations land wrong, why they disappoint fans and all.
Beyond the immediate political debates, you mean? Focusing on the adaptation itself.
Exactly. So let's kick off. It feels like there are maybe two main extreme ways adaptations can go.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. So on one end, you've got what you could call the Purist adaptation.
Okay.
The goal there is maximum faithfulness. Stick to the book like Clue, no cut characters, no changed scenes, definitely use the author's dialogue.
Right, which sounds great on paper, I guess, to a lot of fans, like just film the book.
Yeah, but it's tricky, isn't it? Novels do things film can't easily replicate. All that internal thought, the deep psychological stuff.
Right. Film needs visuals, action, dialogue. You can't just have a voiceover reading the character's mind for 2 hours straight. Well, usually not.
And time constraints are huge. Books can be massive. You have to cut things for a movie or even a TV season.
Even the ones people praise for being faithful, like, say, the BBC Pride and Prejudice series, even that had changes, right? Subtle ones maybe, but still changes.
Exactly. A perfect one-to-one copy is basically impossible. And, I think it's often unfair when critics of modern adaptations get labeled as just wanting that impossible purist version. Usually, the complaint is about something deeper.
Okay, so that's one extreme. What's the other end?
The other end is the name-only adaptation.
Ah.
This is where they take the title, maybe the character names, maybe a vague premise, but then tell a completely different story. It's barely related to the source material.
And Velma seems like the poster child for this, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. I mean, no Scooby-Doo in a Scooby-Doo-related show. That's a big clue.
Yeah. And the characters. Fred, for example, is just radically different from any version we've known.
Completely. Now, Rings of Power or Wheel of Time, they definitely borrow more from the books than Velma does. There's more resemblance.
Sure.
But Velma is just so far out there, it really exemplifies that name-only approach.
So here's the thing, right? Both of these extremes, they often don't work. They leave people feeling dissatisfied.
Yeah, the super purist ones can feel kind of clunky, maybe boring. They don't really use what film does best.
And the name-only ones, well, they just feel like a ripoff almost, like bait and switch.
Exactly. Fans get excited because it's a name they love, and then they get something totally unrelated. You heard that a lot with Rings of Power, Wheel of Time, people feeling a bit cheated.
It suggests maybe the companies see these beloved books as just brand, like a recognizable name they can slap onto anything to guarantee an audience.
That's often how it feels, yeah. Like the story itself doesn't matter as much as the IP recognition. Which leads us to the main idea we want to unpack.
Right. It's not really about being a purist or demanding every detail match. It's about something else.
It's about the spirit. Capturing the spirit of the original story.
Okay, spirit. Let's dig into that. What do we actually mean by the spirit of a story?
Well, I think it's about the fundamental stuff, the core essence, what's left when you strip away the surface details.
So like the main message or themes?
Yeah, themes. And the key characters, who they are at their core, the basic shape of the plot, what it's fundamentally about.
And maybe the atmosphere too, like the tone, the genre, even the feel of the writing sometimes.
Exactly. All those elements combine to create this core spirit.
Okay, but couldn't someone argue that what's fundamental is subjective? Like, who decides what the real spirit is?
That's a fair point, and interpretation definitely plays a role. But I don't think it means anything goes,
Right.
You can support interpretations with evidence from the text. Some readings are just stronger, more defensible than others. Like, you could argue about nuances in Wuthering Heights, but saying it's fundamentally a light, happy romance.
Yeah, that'd be a tough sell based on the book itself. It's pretty dark.
Exactly. So spirit allows for different takes, different valid interpretations, sure. That's why the term is a bit vague, maybe. It's not a rigid checklist.
It's something you have to kind of analyze and feel out from the original work.
Right. It invites discussion about what that core really is.
Let's stick with Wuthering Heights for a second. How would you define its spirit?
Well, for me, the spirit of Wuthering Heights revolves around intense, almost destructive passion, sure, But crucially, it's about revenge and the eventual path to forgiveness.
Heathcliff's whole arc.
Yeah, his drive for vengeance fuels so much tragedy. And the resolution, the glimmer of hope, comes from the younger generation, Hareton and young Cathy, finding mutual forgiveness and breaking that cycle.
Okay, so an adaptation that focused only on the Catherine and Heathcliff romance, making it sort of a sappy, tragic love story, but ignoring the brutal revenge and the final forgiveness part.
That adaptation would be missing the spirit, I'd argue. It'd be focusing on one thread, maybe the most famous one, but ignoring the deeper thematic core about revenge and its consequence and how forgiveness offers a way out.
Makes sense. What about something like the setting, the time period? Is that fundamental to the spirit?
That's interesting. Wuthering Heights has such a specific Gothic isolated feel, but it also feels kind of timeless in its passions.
Yeah.
You could argue maybe that you can transpose that story of intense love, betrayal, revenge, and ultimate forgiveness into a different setting, a different time, and potentially still capture the core spirit. The Yorkshire moors are iconic, but maybe not the absolute essence of the story's theme.
So changing things, even big things, is okay if you keep that spirit intact.
That's the argument, yeah. Good adaptations often do that. Fans appreciate it.
But when you lose the spirit, you get these, well, spiritless adaptations, like Velma.
Exactly. Velma is maybe the ultimate example of having the name, but none of the original spirit.
Yeah.
But let's look at some others, too. The Netflix Persuasion adaptation, for instance.
Oh, yeah, that definitely fits the spiritless description for a lot of Austen fans. What went wrong there, do you think?
Well, big one was Anne Elliot herself. In the book, she's quiet, thoughtful, melancholic, resilient, but reserved.
Right. Shaped by regret, but with this deep inner strength.
Exactly. The adaptation made her, well, kind of sassy and quippy, breaking the fourth wall, mugging for the camera.
Like a modern rom-com lead, almost.
Yeah. It felt like they took a very superficial idea of an Austen heroine, maybe thinking of Lizzie Bennet, and just pasted it onto Anne without understanding her specific character.
It ignored her quietness, her internal journey.
Totally. And by doing that, they missed a huge theme of the book, which is about that slow, painful, subtle process of misunderstanding and eventual reconnection between Anne and Wentworth. Remember that key conversation near the end about women's constancy?
Where she finally articulates her feelings and perspective.
Right. Her growth involves understanding different viewpoints. The adaptations seem to just skate over that complexity.
Maybe Persuasion, being so internal, is just really hard to adapt visually without losing some, even if they had understood the spirit better.
That's a really good point. Maybe its core strengths are inherently literary, focused on Anne's inner world, making a faithful, spirited adaptation extra challenging.
Okay, what about the Wheel of Time? People seem more divided on that one. Better than Persuasion, maybe, but still criticized.
Yeah, it definitely engages more directly with the plot and world of the books than Persuasion or Velma, but it still struggles with some core concepts of Jordan's.
Like what?
A major one is the male-female dynamic that's central to the books. It's in the magic system, Sedan and Sadar, the male and female halves of the one power. It's in the societies, like the Women's Circle and the Village Council in Emmons Field.
The show seemed to downplay the Men's Council, didn't it? Focused heavily on the Women's Circle.
It did, yeah. And that risks missing the whole point that the world is out of balance precisely because of the conflict and lack of cooperation between men and women reflected in the magic and the history. The breaking of the world itself stemmed from that inability to work together.
So overemphasizing one side throws off that core theme of balance.
I think so. And another thing is the magic. Sometimes the show seems to prioritize big, flashy spectacle over the rules and limitations Jordan established.
Like Moiraine in the first episode. She seemed incredibly powerful.
Right. Almost too powerful compared to later established limits and what other characters struggle with. Like Rand later being unable to, say, resurrect a child. It creates inconsistencies.
And undermines the stakes, maybe, if the rules keep changing for visual flair.
Exactly. It misses the point that the power has costs and requires control, and again, that balance between Sedan and Sedar is crucial. It's not just about awesome fireball.
Okay, so Wheel of Time has more connection to the source, but still fumbles some key spiritual elements, which brings us back to Velma.
Yeah, Velma really is the extreme end. Forget fumbling the spirit. It feels like it tossed the spirit out the window entirely.
The original Scooby-Doo spirit is all about, like, friendship, teamwork, lighthearted mystery, goofy fun.
Right. Velma is not that. It's cynical, edgy. The characters often dislike each other. Again, maybe an adult pay could work, but this version is just so far removed, it truly feels name only.
Like, they just wanted the Scooby-Doo brand recognition to launch a completely different kind of show.
That's the impression it gives, that the company's agenda or the creator's vision took total precedence over anything related to the original work's spirit.
But crucially, this doesn't mean adaptations can't change things. We're not saying you have to be a purist.
Not at all. There are great examples of adaptations that make huge changes but still feel true to the spirit.
Okay, let's talk about some of those to show we're not just complaining. What's a good example?
Francis Ford Coppola, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992.
Ooh, interesting choice, because that film makes a massive change, doesn't it?
It does. The whole reincarnation plotline, Mina Harker being the reincarnation of Dracula's lost love, Alyssa Beta, that is absolutely nowhere in Stoker's novel.
Right. In the book, Mina is terrified of Dracula. She's a victim he preys upon, not his long-lost soulmate.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift in their relationship. And yet, many people feel the film worked, that it captures something essential about Dracula.
Why do you think that is, despite the big change?
I think it's because Coppola zeroed in on another core element of the novel's spirit.
Yeah.
The theme of Victorian repression, particularly sexual repression and anxiety.
Ah, okay. Like Jonathan's encounter with the brides.
Yes. And the homoerotic undertone, Lucy's transformation into a voluptuous predator, Mina's own violation. The book is steeped in anxieties about sexuality, desire, and transgression, even if it's often coded.
And the film just makes all that much more explicit.
Right. You could argue that the film's overt, sometimes shocking sexuality is a way to provoke a similar reaction in a modern audience, a sense of taboo being broken that the Victorians might have felt for the novel's more veiled suggestions.
So it's translating the effect and the underlying theme, even by changing the specific plot device.
That's the idea. Plus, the film absolutely nails the Gothic atmosphere, the look, the feel, and the characters, even with the changes, often feel psychologically rooted in Stoker's creation. Gary Oldman's Dracula is iconic. Even Keanu, well, maybe not Keanu, but Winona Ryder and Sadie Frost as Lucy capture something.
Okay, that's a great example. What else?
How about the recent AMC interview with the vampire series, based on the first season anyway?
Right, that made some significant changes too.
Huge ones. Swapping Louis from a white 18th century plantation owner to a black Creole brothel owner in early 1900s New Orleans. That's a major shift in background and context.
Definitely. Does it still capture the spirit for you?
I think it does, yeah. Because while Louis's race and profession are changed, what feels fundamental to his character in the books isn't really tied to being a white slave owner.
What is fundamental then?
His inner conflict, his guilt over being a vampire, his struggle with immortality, his intense, toxic push-pull relationship with Lestat, his search for meaning and connection. That's the core of Louis's journey.
And the show keeps that.
It really foregrounds it. And crucially, it takes the homoeroticism between Louis and Lestat, which was always powerfully present but subtextual in Rice's original novel.
And makes it text, explicit.
Exactly. Which feels like honoring a vital part of the source material spirit, even while changing other significant details like the time period or Louis's background. Now, changing the time does slightly affect the theme of vampires witnessing vast swaths of history, but the core relationship dynamics feel very true.
So it's another case of big changes, but the core themes and character dynamic spirit remains central.
Precisely. Though I will say, I tried the Mayfair Witches adaptation from the same network and turned it off pretty quickly. Didn't grab me the same way.
Fair enough. So the main point stands. Radical changes can work if the adaptation honors the spirit.
Yes. The problem isn't change itself. It's when adaptations seem to take the name and maybe a few superficial bits, but tell a fundamentally different story, often driven by the creator's own interests or agenda. It feels, well, less honest than fan fiction, where people are usually upfront about what they're changing and why.
Which leads to the big question, why does this seem to be happening so often lately? Are we just imagining it, or is there a real trend of these, let's call them flawed, spiritless adaptations?
Well, the internet definitely amplifies negativity, so maybe it just seems more prevalent. But I do suspect there's something more going on.
What do you think it is?
I think it boils down to maybe two main things, greed and hubris.
Okay, let's start with greed. How does that play in?
Think back to the early 2000s. You had the Harry Potter movies, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, hugely successful, critically acclaimed for the most part, beloved by fans, and made enormous amounts of money.
Right, cultural phenomena.
That success seems to have created this mania, almost. Studios saw adaptations of popular books as guaranteed cash cows, built-in fan base, recognizable IP. Less risky than original ideas.
So they started greenlighting more and more, maybe focusing more on the potential profit than the artistic challenge.
It feels that way sometimes. Look at Rings of Power or Wheel of Time. Even with mixed or negative reactions, they still pulled in viewers at least initially. Because of the name recognition, the brand is powerful.
And Game of Thrones fits in here too, doesn't it, as a kind of cautionary tale?
Absolutely. It started off quite faithful, very successful, but once it went past George R.R. Martin's books,
The quality dipped for many people. It felt different.
yeah, many felt it lost the spirit, the complexity, and evolved into more generic, spectacle-driven fantasy. It showed what can happen when the strong source material runs out.
And you hear about executives like Jeff Bezos reportedly wanting his own Game of Thrones for Amazon.
Right. It suggests these huge adaptation projects can become almost like vanity projects for streaming services or powerful individuals. Replicating past financial success becomes the primary goal, sometimes overshadowing the need for a good adaptation that respects the source.
Is there any hope this trend reverses?
Maybe. With TV shows, unlike movies, if the quality isn't there season after season, viewers do tend to drop off. Maybe that forces a rethink, a return to prioritizing quality, and yes, capturing the spirit to keep people invested long term. We'll see.
Okay, so that's the greed angle. What about hubris?
Hubris.
Yeah.
Arrogance, basically.
Yeah.
Look, these classic books, Austen, Tolkien, Jordan, Stoker, they're classics for a reason. The stories work, the characters are compelling, the worlds are rich.
They've stood the test of time.
Exactly. So adapting them successfully requires, I think, a certain amount of respect, maybe even humility, and understanding that you're working with something already great. Instead of this attitude you sometimes sense, a kind of sneering dismissal of the source material, a feeling that the modern creators know better, that they need to fix or update or critique the original work through their adaptation.
Like they think they can improve on Jane Austen or Tolkien.
Yeah, and that often leads to inconsistencies or just bad storytelling because, frankly, they're usually not better writers or storytellers than the original master.
Again, Game of Thrones after the books seems like an example. The original writing quality wasn't matched.
Precisely. And then there's the actors. You sometimes hear actors admitting they never even read the book they're adapting.
Seriously, how can you play a character without reading the source?
Right. It boggles the mind. It suggests this arrogance, this belief that their interpretation, created in a vacuum, is somehow sufficient or even superior to one informed by the original text. Like imagine saying, I'm playing Anna Karenina, but I didn't bother reading Tolstoy. It's absurd.
Compare that to Coppola with Dracula.
Yeah.
You mentioned he had the actors read parts of the book.
Yeah, he had them read key scenes aloud together to really soak in the atmosphere, the language, the character dynamics. It shows a respect for the source, even while he was planning his own significant change. It allows the actors to build on that foundation.
So respect doesn't mean rigid imitation, but it means engaging deeply with the original.
Exactly. And when creators defend drastic changes by saying they need creative freedom, you have to ask, if you want complete freedom to tell your own story, why not just create an original work?
Instead of hijacking an existing fan base for a story that has little to do with what they love.
Right. Because creativity isn't stifled by respecting the source. Coppola's Dracula was incredibly creative. The Interview with the Vampire Show took big creative sling, but they did so while seeming to understand and honor the core spirit.
So what's the ideal approach then?
It's about empathy, I think.
Yeah.
Engaging with the work on its own terms, trying to understand the world, the characters, the themes as intended, and then figuring out how best to bring those key fundaments, that spirit, to life in a new medium for a new audience.
Not approaching it with greed, thinking only of the brand name, or with hubris, thinking you can automatically do better.
Exactly. Adaptations driven by those motives are far more likely to fail because they fundamentally misunderstand or disrespect the very thing they're supposed to be adapting. And you have to wonder, long term, which versions will endure, these often fleeting, spiritless adaptations or the original works themselves.
That's a really good point to end on. It definitely gives us, and hopefully you listening, a lot to think about.
Yeah, think about that idea of a novel's spirit. What does it mean to you? Do the adaptations you've seen line up with what we've talked about?
What do you feel is missing when adaptations go wrong? And are fans just being unreasonable purists, or is there something more fundamental usually at stake?
Lots to mull over.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today into the often tricky world of book-to-screen adaptation.
Hope it sparks some thoughts. Until next time.